Ambassador Dante Rivera had been warned, repeatedly, with increasingly dire language and at steadily increasing volumes. Do not approach Queen Lysara under any circumstances, his chief diplomatic advisor Morgan had said during the third, or was it fourth, briefing that morning. She'd pulled up holographic images of the Queen, all showing a tall, elegant figure in elaborate robes, her expression as warm and inviting as a glacial cliff face. Do not address her directly. Do not meet her gaze unless explicitly granted permission. Do not even breathe in her direction unless absolutely necessary. You're making her sound like a radioactive deity, Dante had replied, which earned him a look that suggested Morgan was reconsidering his suitability for this posting. She's the sovereign of an empire that existed before humans discovered fire. She's ruled for 50 years with absolute authority and absolute emotional detachment. In half a century, no one, and I mean no one, has seen her demonstrate anything resembling normal social behavior. She is protocol incarnate, the throne given form, and she will not appreciate a human ambassador treating her with anything resembling familiarity. That conversation had been 6 hours ago. Now, standing in the great hall of the royal palace on Kelthara Prime, Dante was beginning to understand why Morgan had been so emphatic. The hall was stunning in a way that made human architecture look like we'd been building with particularly ambitious Legos. The ceiling soared so high it disappeared into shadows that probably had their own weather systems. Bioluminescent crystals grew from the walls in deliberate patterns, providing light that felt alive somehow, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. The floor was some kind of polished stone that reflected everything with perfect clarity, creating the disorienting impression that you were walking through space itself. And filling that impossible space were hundreds of Keltharans, tall, elegant beings whose skin shifted color subtly based on their emotional states. Their ears swept back from their temples in graceful points, decorated with jewelry that indicated rank and family affiliation. They all wore formal attire that made Dante's diplomatic uniform feel decidedly pedestrian. Every single one of them was staring at him, with expressions ranging from polite curiosity to barely concealed disdain. Humans were newcomers to this part of the galaxy, barely worthy of diplomatic recognition in Keltharan eyes. That they'd sent an ambassador at all was apparently considered either generous or desperate depending on who you asked. Dante stood in his designated position, exactly 15 paces from the throne, as specified by protocol, and tried to look like someone who belonged here. Morgan stood beside him, radiating nervous energy and probably mentally composing the resignation letter she'd submit if Dante made a mistake. Then the Queen entered, and the hall fell into absolute silence. Queen Lysara Vale was magnificent in a way that had nothing to do with beauty and everything to do with presence. She was tall, taller than every other Keltharan in the room, and moved with fluid grace that made walking look like an art form. Her skin was a cool silver blue that Dante's briefing materials had indicated meant complete emotional control. Her ears were adorned with circlets of crystal that caught the light and scattered it in rainbow patterns. And her robes, stars above, her robes looked like someone had woven starlight into fabric that flowed around her like liquid space. But it was her face that arrested attention. She was beautiful, yes, but it was a cold beauty, perfect and untouchable. Her eyes were deep violet and moved across the assembly with the kind of detached assessment you'd use when evaluating chess pieces. No warmth. No recognition of the individuals before her, just authority examining its domain. Everyone bowed. Dante bowed too, keeping his eyes lowered as instructed. He heard the Queen's footsteps, soft but distinct in the absolute silence, moving to her throne. The sound of fabric settling, then her voice, clear and carrying effortlessly through the hall. Rise. The assembly straightened. Dante straightened with them, careful to keep his eyes respectfully lowered at approximately throne level rather than meeting her gaze directly. We convene this gathering to address matters of governance and to formally acknowledge the presence of humanity's representative, the Queen said. Her voice was perfectly modulated, revealing nothing. Ambassador Rivera of Earth. You may approach. Dante felt Morgan stiffen beside him. This wasn't in the briefing. Ambassadors were supposed to remain in their designated positions unless specifically summoned, and those summons were supposed to come through intermediaries, not directly from the sovereign. But you didn't refuse a direct command from a queen. Dante moved forward, counting paces silently. 10, 11, 12. He stopped at exactly 15 paces from the throne, the closest protocol allowed without explicit invitation, and bowed again. Your Majesty, I am honored to represent humanity in your presence. You bring greetings from your Earth. I bring greetings, hopes for productive diplomatic relations, and apparently 3 formal certificates of credential that I'm told must be presented in order of increasing officiality. Dante produced the documents from his diplomatic satchel, though I confess I'm uncertain what makes one certificate more official than another. They all look equally official to me. He heard Morgan make a sound that might have been a suppressed groan. Making jokes to an alien queen was definitely not in the diplomatic handbook. Dante was about to apologize when something impossible happened. Queen Lysara's skin shifted, just slightly, just a flicker from silver blue toward a warmer tone. It was so brief Dante almost missed it. Her expression remained perfectly neutral, but he could have sworn something changed in her eyes. The barest hint of amusement, maybe, or recognition that he'd said something unexpected. Your documents will be reviewed by my council, she said. For now, observe these proceedings. You may learn something of how ancient civilizations govern. It could have been condescending. It probably was intended to be at least slightly condescending. But Dante heard something else in her tone, something that might have been curiosity. Or perhaps he was projecting, seeing things he wanted to see because the alternative was spending hours watching alien bureaucracy without any interesting personal drama. He returned to his position beside Morgan, who looked like she was aging in real time from stress. Don't, she whispered. Don't make jokes. Don't be charming. Just stand there and try to look respectable. I am being respectable. I'm standing very respectfully. Look how straight my posture is. Dante, I swear. But the formal proceedings had begun, cutting off whatever threat Morgan was about to deliver. Various Keltheran nobles approached the throne to present reports, make requests, or engage in what seemed like elaborate verbal chess matches disguised as policy discussions. Everything was ritualized to an almost painful degree. Specific phrases had to be used, approaches made from specific angles, distance maintained at exactly prescribed measurements. Queen Lysara presided over it all with perfect composure. She listened to each presentation, asked pointed questions, delivered judgments or deferrals with clear authority. Her skin remained that cool silver blue, unchanging. Her face stayed impassive. She was exactly what Morgan had described, protocol incarnate, the throne given form. But Dante noticed things. Small things that probably didn't mean anything but that his diplomatically trained eye couldn't help cataloging. The way her skin darkened infinitesimally when military deployments were discussed, a microreaction suggesting concern or displeasure. The subtle warming when a petition about educational reforms was presented. The slight tightening around her eyes when an older advisor delivered a report in particularly elaborate formal language that conveyed essentially nothing. She was reacting. Barely, almost imperceptibly, but reacting. Which meant beneath that perfect sovereign mask was a person with opinions and emotions and responses she was working to control. That was interesting. That was very interesting. About 2 hours into the proceedings, there was a formal recess. Dante's legs were grateful. Standing at perfect attention for that long was apparently not something his body had trained for. Food and drink appeared, carried by silent servants. The assembly separated into carefully organized social clusters, rank, family affiliation, political faction all determining who spoke with whom. Dante and his diplomatic team were directed to a section near the hall's edge. Not the worst position. They weren't actively being ignored, but definitely not the center of social activity. A Keltharan official approached to make polite conversation that felt more like a diplomatic quiz, asking about Earth and human governance in ways that suggested he was filing away information for later analysis. Dante answered honestly but briefly, trying not to commit any cultural faux pas by being too enthusiastic or too reserved. He accepted a drink from a passing servant, something sparkling that tasted like if starfruit married electricity and they had beautiful children. And then the crowd parted. Conversations died mid-sentence. Dante looked up to see Queen Lysara walking through the hall with clear purpose. The crowd moved aside immediately, everyone bowing as she passed. Her skin had shifted to a warmer tone, somewhere between silver and gold, and her eyes were focused with unmistakable intent. She was walking toward the diplomatic section, toward him. Morgan grabbed his arm with enough force to leave bruises. "Bow," she hissed. "Bow now and don't move and pray to whatever gods you believe in that you haven't somehow offended her." Dante bowed, his heart doing complicated aerobics in his chest. He heard the Queen's footsteps approaching, stopping directly in front of him. Through his peripheral vision, he saw several members of her council following at the prescribed distance, their expressions ranging from confused to horrified. Ambassador Rivera. The Queen's voice was perfectly controlled, but there was something in it, something that hadn't been there during formal proceedings. "You may rise." Dante straightened slowly, keeping his eyes respectfully lowered to about shoulder level. Up close, Queen Lysara was even more striking. Her presence filled space in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. Then she did something that made the entire assembly gasp audibly. She sat down, not on her throne, not on some elevated platform designed for royalty. She sat on the bench beside where Dante was standing, the simple stone bench meant for lower-ranking attendees. The bench that absolutely no one with any rank above household staff would sit on. The bench that a queen definitely, absolutely, unquestionably should not be sitting on. The hall's silence was so complete that Dante could hear his own heartbeat. Probably everyone else could hear it too. "You may sit, Ambassador," Queen Lysara said, and there was something in her tone that might have been amusement at the court's shock. "Unless you prefer to stand awkwardly while I observe you from below." Dante glanced at Morgan, whose expression suggested she was having an out-of-body experience and possibly contemplating new careers. Then he looked at the Queen, really looked at her for the first time, meeting her eyes directly. They were stunning up close, deep violet with lighter lavender at the edges, and they held unmistakable intelligence and something that looked remarkably like curiosity. Her skin had warmed to a soft gold, which his briefing materials had mentioned indicated interest or engagement. He sat because refusing seemed worse than accepting. "Your Majesty," he managed, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm honored, though I confess I'm thoroughly confused about why you've chosen to sit beside a relatively unimportant human ambassador when you have an entire court of presumably more important people to speak with." "Perhaps I find relatively unimportant human ambassadors more interesting than my court," she replied. Her voice was still perfectly controlled, but there was warmth in it now. "You have been watching me, Ambassador Rivera." Dante's stomach dropped. "I apologize if I was inappropriate, Your Majesty. I meant no disrespect." "I did not say you were inappropriate. I said you were watching. There is a difference." She tilted her head slightly, her ears shifting in a way that might have indicated curiosity. "Do you know what you were watching for?" Dante hesitated, then chose honesty because lying to a queen seemed inadvisable. "I was trying to see past the protocol, to understand the person making the decisions instead of just the throne delivering judgments, which probably sounds presumptuous. It sounds observant. In 2 hours of formal proceedings, you were the only person in this hall who looked at me as if I were a person rather than an institution. Her skin warmed slightly more. It was refreshing, unexpected, and it made me curious about you. Dante heard Morgan make a sound behind him that suggested she might be having a medical emergency. Several court advisors looked like they wanted to intervene, but didn't quite dare approach their queen uninvited. "I'm not that interesting, Your Majesty," Dante said. "I make terrible jokes, I have questionable taste in beverages, and according to my mother, I have excellent judgment about everything except when to keep my mouth shut." That got a reaction. The queen's lips quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile but was definitely the precursor to one. "Your mother sounds wise. Tell me, Ambassador, during the agricultural reform petition, you had a reaction. Subtle but distinct. What were you thinking?" He blinked. She'd noticed that. During formal proceedings, while she was supposed to be focused on governance, the distribution system they described sounded inefficient. "We had similar problems on Mars during early terraforming. We solved it with a rotational priority system that accounted for." He cut himself off. "But I'm sure your people have already considered such approaches." "We have not." "Explain." So Dante explained, and Queen Lysara listened, not with polite sovereign attention, but with genuine engagement. She asked questions that proved she understood the technical details faster than he could explain them. They fell into actual conversation, ideas bouncing back and forth, and Dante forgot momentarily that he was talking to an alien queen who ruled billions, and instead just enjoyed talking to someone who was clearly brilliant and interested. The hall watched in stunned silence. The queen's advisors looked increasingly distressed. Morgan appeared to be praying. And through it all, Queen Lysara and Ambassador Rivera sat side by side on a common stone bench, discussing water management like colleagues rather than sovereign and subject. Eventually, a chime sounded indicating the recess was ending. The queen stood, and Dante stood with her. She looked at him with those shifting violet eyes, and her skin was that warm gold that indicated, according to his briefings, interest and engagement. "You will attend the private council session tomorrow, Ambassador Rivera," she said. "Not a request, a command, but delivered with warmth rather than cold authority. Your perspectives may prove useful." "I would be honored, Your Majesty." She inclined her head slightly, acknowledgement that felt more like equals than sovereign and subject. Then she returned to her throne, her skin cooling back to professional silver blue, her expression settling into that perfect sovereign mask. The formal proceedings resumed, but everything had changed. The queen had broken 50 years of protocol by sitting beside a human ambassador, and everyone in the hall knew it. Dante returned to his position beside Morgan, who grabbed his arm the moment formal attention was elsewhere. "What," she said with dangerous calm, "just happened?" "I think I accidentally made a friend," Dante offered weakly. "You can't make friends with an alien queen. That's not how diplomacy works. Apparently it is on Kelthara, though I'm as confused as you are." Morgan looked like she wanted to say more, but the proceedings continued, demanding their attention. Dante tried to focus on the discussions, but he kept catching glimpses of Queen Lysara across the hall. Her skin would warm slightly when her eyes found his. Not obviously, just a subtle shift that probably only someone watching for it would notice. And Dante, despite every diplomatic instinct screaming that this was complicated and dangerous and probably inadvisable, found himself watching. Found himself curious about the person behind the throne. Found himself wanting to know more about a queen who'd chosen to sit beside him when she had an entire empire of more important options. This assignment was supposed to be straightforward. Establish formal relations, observe Keltharan governance, avoid causing interstellar incidents through human ignorance. Instead, he'd apparently caught the attention of an alien sovereign who was interested in him for reasons he didn't fully understand. This was either going to be the best posting of his career, or the one that got him recalled in absolute disgrace? Possibly both. The private council session was scheduled for mid-morning, which gave Dante exactly enough time to suffer through Morgan's emergency briefing about why everything that happened yesterday was a diplomatic crisis waiting to detonate. "Queens don't sit beside ambassadors," she said for approximately the 15th time, pacing their assigned quarters like a caged predator. "Queens don't invite junior diplomats to private council sessions. Queens especially don't look at humans like they're interesting, rather than barely tolerable." She was being friendly, Dante offered, which earned him a look that could have stripped paint. Friendly is not a word that has ever been applied to Queen Lysara. In 50 years of rule, she has been authoritative, brilliant, ruthless, and occasionally terrifying. Never friendly. Morgan stopped pacing to fix him with serious attention. "Dante, I need you to understand something. The Queen's emotional detachment isn't personal preference. It's cultural expectation bordering on sacred duty. Keltharan royalty maintains absolute control and distance. It's how they've governed for millennia. If she's deviating from that with you, it means something. And we need to figure out what before this becomes a political incident." "Maybe she just wanted someone to talk to," Dante suggested. "Ruling billions in isolation for 50 years sounds incredibly lonely." "Lonely isn't a queen's concern. Stability is, tradition is. Maintaining the structures that keep an ancient empire functioning." Morgan resumed pacing. "But you might be onto something. If she's been isolated that long and suddenly someone treats her like a person instead of a throne, that could explain the interest. It's still dangerous, though. Her court isn't going to appreciate their sovereign developing personal connections, especially with a human. So what do I do? Treat her coldly to maintain proper distance?" "No, that would offend her, which is worse. You," Morgan sighed. "You be yourself. Be respectful but genuine. Answer her questions honestly. And for the love of everything diplomatic, don't make jokes." "I make jokes when I'm nervous. It's a coping mechanism." "Cope silently." The council chamber was smaller than the Great Hall but somehow more intimidating. 7 advisors sat around an elliptical table, the Queen's inner circle, people who'd served her for decades. They all watched Dante enter with expressions suggesting they'd prefer he didn't exist. Queen Lysara sat at the table's head, and today her skin was a neutral silver gray that Dante couldn't quite interpret. Her expression was perfectly composed, the sovereign mask firmly in place. "Ambassador Rivera, please sit." She gestured to an empty seat, not at the far end of the table where observers typically sat but 4 positions from her. Close enough to participate, not just observe. "My council and I were discussing infrastructure development. Your insights may prove valuable." One of the advisors, an older male whose skin flashed briefly red, suggesting irritation, spoke with careful formality. "Your Majesty, with respect, Ambassador Rivera lacks context for our economic framework. His participation may prove more confusing than helpful." "Then we will provide context," the Queen replied smoothly. "Begin your report, Advisor Thane. Include sufficient background that our guest can contribute meaningfully." It was a polite command to stop objecting, delivered with absolute authority. Advisor Thane's skin flickered with suppressed annoyance, but he complied, launching into a presentation about proposed trade routes that required significant infrastructure investment. Dante listened carefully, trying to follow the economic models and strategic considerations. Keltharan governance was incredibly complex. Every decision seemed to have 7 layers of historical precedent and political implications. But the core problem was familiar: how to maximize trade efficiency while minimizing cost and risk. When Thane finished his presentation, another advisor began raising concerns about timeline and resource allocation. The discussion became a debate, different advisors presenting competing priorities. The Queen listened to all of it with perfect attention, her skin staying that neutral gray, giving away nothing. Then she turned The Centauri relay is controlled by the Merchants Consortium. Advisor Thane objected immediately. Using it would require negotiating access fees. Yes, but even accounting for access fees, the total cost would be lower than building 4 additional stations, Dante countered. You're prioritizing complete control over cost efficiency, which might be the right choice for strategic reasons, but it's worth acknowledging the trade-off. Silence fell over the council chamber. Several advisors looked like Dante had suggested something scandalous, but the Queen's skin had shifted, warming to that gold tone that indicated interest. "Continue," she said. So Dante continued, warming to the subject despite his nervousness. He outlined the cost comparison, suggested negotiation strategies for consortium access, proposed alternative routing that would maximize both efficiency and strategic control. Some of his suggestions were immediately dismissed for good reasons he hadn't considered: political tensions he wasn't aware of, technological limitations unique to Keltheran systems. But others sparked genuine discussion. The council session transformed from formal presentations into actual debate. Advisors challenged Dante's assumptions, he challenged theirs back, and the Queen presided over it all with visible engagement. Her questions were incisive, forcing everyone to justify their positions rather than simply stating them. 3 hours passed in what felt like minutes. When the Queen finally called an end to the session, Dante's head was spinning with information, and his notebook was full of scrawled observations. Ambassador Rivera will attend future council sessions, the Queen announced as the advisors prepared to leave. His perspective provides useful contrast to our established frameworks. You are dismissed. The advisors filed out, several still looking at Dante with suspicion, though a few seemed grudgingly impressed. When the chamber was empty except for the Queen and Dante, the silence felt different, less formal, more intimate. "Your Majesty," Dante began, "I hope I didn't overstep. You challenged 3 of my most senior advisors and forced them to reconsider assumptions they've held for decades." The Queen interrupted, standing and moving to the window that overlooked the palace gardens. "Do you call that overstepping? I call it probably getting myself expelled from future sessions for presumption." That got a sound from her, almost a laugh. Her skin had warmed to copper. "Do you know the last time someone in my council challenged an assumption, instead of simply supporting or opposing based on political faction? I'm guessing it's been a while. 17 years, Ambassador. 17 years since anyone brought me a genuinely new idea instead of repackaging old debates in new language." She turned to face him, and her expression held something Dante couldn't quite name. "My advisors are brilliant, loyal, dedicated to our empire's success, but they are also desperately afraid of appearing foolish in front of their sovereign, so they present only fully developed positions, never exploratory thoughts or half-formed ideas. It makes for very polished presentations and very stagnant governance. Is that why you invited me, for fresh perspectives?" "Partially, but also." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "Yesterday, when I sat beside you, you looked uncomfortable, but not because I am Queen. You were uncomfortable because you thought you'd done something wrong, not because my presence itself intimidated you. That is remarkably rare." "I was definitely intimidated by your presence, just also concerned about diplomatic protocol. But you spoke to me as Lysara, not as the throne. You asked what I was thinking during proceedings. You treated my curiosity as valid rather than testing." She moved closer, her violet eyes studying him with that unnerving intensity. "Why are you not afraid of me, Ambassador?" "I'm terrified of you, Your Majesty." "You hide it remarkably well." "I hide it terribly. I just figure if I'm going to cause diplomatic incidents through ignorance, I might as well be useful first." This time she definitely laughed, a short, surprised sound that seemed to startle her as much as it delighted Dante. Her skin flushed warmer, almost copper. "I have not laughed in council chambers in." She paused, calculating, 3 decades, you are either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish. My mother says I'm both. Usually right, before she apologizes for my behavior to whomever I've just embarrassed us in front of. I would like to hear more about your mother, about your life on Earth, about how humans govern themselves and approach problems, and the thousand other things we never discuss in formal settings because protocol demands appropriate distance. She gestured to the bench by the window. Sit with me, Dante. No titles, no protocol, just conversation. It was dangerous. It was probably inadvisable. It definitely violated multiple diplomatic guidelines Morgan had spent hours drilling into him. But the Queen, Lysara, was looking at him with something that looked remarkably like hope mixed with vulnerability. Dante sat. They talked for 2 hours. About Earth, about Kelthara, about governance and art, and the strange loneliness of being visible to everyone but seen by no one. Lysara asked questions that proved she was genuinely curious about human culture, not just cataloging information for strategic purposes. Dante asked questions back, carefully, respectfully, but genuinely interested in understanding her, not just her empire. And gradually, he watched the sovereign mask slip, watched her shoulders relax, her skin warm to that copper gold that indicated comfort, watched her laugh at terrible jokes and argue good-naturedly about optimal agricultural strategies, watched her become Lysara instead of Queen Lysara. This is dangerous, she said eventually, her voice quiet. What we're doing. My court expects absolute emotional control from their sovereign. They expect distance and authority, not friendship. Is that what this is, friendship? I don't know what else to call it. I have counselors, advisors, subjects. I do not have friends. I am not supposed to have friends. She looked at him directly. But I find I want this. Want conversations that matter. Want someone who sees me as Lysara rather than just as throne incarnate. Is that selfish? It's human, or I guess the Keltharan equivalent. It's dangerous. My court is already unsettled by my deviation from protocol yesterday. If I continue, she trailed off. What happens if you continue? Political pressure. Concerned advisors suggesting I'm compromised. Questions about whether personal attachments are influencing policy decisions. Possibly worse, depending on how threatened certain factions feel by changes to established power dynamics. And if you stop, return to perfect sovereign isolation. Lysara was quiet for a long moment. Then I returned to the loneliest existence imaginable, surrounded by people constantly, yet absolutely alone. Which is sustainable, I've done it for 50 years. But after yesterday, after this, she gestured between them, I don't know if I can return to that. You've reminded me what it feels like to be seen. Then don't return to it. Keep choosing to be seen. Keep having conversations. Keep being Lysara as well as Queen. Even though it will cause political complications. Especially because of that, some things are worth complications. Her skin flared brighter copper gold. You are either very wise or very naive, Ambassador Rivera. Can I be both? Apparently, she stood and Dante stood with her. There is a gathering this evening. Informal, household and close associates. I would like you to attend. Will that cause more scandal? Undoubtedly. But I find I care less about scandal than I care about the possibility of genuine connection. She moved toward the door, then paused. Thank you, Dante, for treating me as person instead of institution, for making me laugh, for reminding me that sovereignty need not require complete isolation. She left before Dante could respond, and he stood alone in the council chamber, trying to process the fact that he'd apparently become friends with an alien queen. This posting was getting complicated in ways his training had definitely not prepared him for. And despite all the rational diplomatic concerns, despite Morgan's certain horror, despite the political complications Lysara had warned about, Dante found himself looking forward to that evening's gathering. Found himself wanting to know more about Lysara, not the queen, just Lysara. The person who'd been isolated for 50 years and was just now remembering what connection felt like. This was dangerous. This was complicated. This was probably going to end in diplomatic disaster, but it was also real and honest and worth the risk, even if Morgan killed him for it. Morgan did not, in fact, kill Dante, but she did spend 45 minutes explaining in increasingly creative detail exactly how attending an informal royal gathering would complicate his posting, potentially damage human-Keltheran relations, and definitely violate approximately 17 subsections of diplomatic protocol. "I'm going," Dante said when she finally paused for breath. "You're what? Dante, you can't just accept social invitations from alien monarchs. She specifically invited me. Refusing would be more insulting than accepting." That's rationalization, and you know it. You want to go because you've developed some kind of, Morgan gestured vaguely, connection with her, which is the exact opposite of maintaining professional distance. Maybe professional distance isn't what this situation needs. Maybe what Kelthara needs is seeing their queen as a person instead of just an authority figure. Maybe that's actually diplomatically valuable. Morgan stared at him. "You're justifying personal interest as diplomatic strategy." "I'm saying my personal interest might align with diplomatic goals. Stranger things have happened." "Name one." "The entire Roman Empire." "That's not even," Morgan sighed. "Fine, go to the gathering. Be charming. Try not to accidentally marry the queen or start a revolution. I'll be here writing contingency plans for when this inevitably explodes." The gathering was held in the royal gardens, which turned out to be less garden and more ecosystem that happens to be aesthetically arranged. Bioluminescent plants created living light sculptures. Water features manipulated gravity to flow in impossible directions. And everywhere, the air smelled like something between jasmine and starlight, if starlight had a scent, which apparently on Kelthara it did. Dante arrived to find about 50 Keltherans mingling in clusters, their skin colors shifting as they conversed, flashes of warmth indicating pleasure, cooler tones suggesting focused discussion. Everyone wore simpler attire than the formal gathering, but simpler was relative. The least elaborate outfit present would have looked like high fashion on Earth. Then Dante spotted Lysara, and his breath caught despite every attempt at diplomatic composure. She wore robes in shades of deep purple that brought out the violet in her eyes, cut in flowing lines that suggested elegance without the rigid formality of her throne attire. Her hair was down, he'd only seen it severely styled before, falling past her shoulders in dark waves, and her skin was that warm bronze that indicated comfort and contentment. She looked like herself, not the throne, not protocol incarnate, just Lysara. She saw him and smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face from beautiful to luminous. She excused herself from her current conversation and crossed the garden to meet him. "You came," she said, and there was genuine pleasure in her voice. "You invited me." Refusing seemed diplomatically inadvisable. "Is that the only reason?" "No, I also wanted to see you outside formal contexts. To talk without worrying about protocol or political implications, or whether every word will be analyzed by 17 advisors." Her skin warmed further. "Then we have the same goal. Come, there are people I want you to meet." She introduced him around, not as the human ambassador or Earth's representative, but as Dante, who has interesting perspectives on infrastructure and terrible jokes about dimensional mechanics. It was deliberately casual, humanizing both of them in ways that formal titles never could. Dante found himself in genuine conversations with a city administrator about urban planning challenges, a cultural minister who was fascinated by human music, and a military advisor who grudgingly admitted that sometimes fresh perspectives revealed blind spots in established strategies. Through it all, Lysara kept gravitating back to him. Not obviously, she circulated appropriately, spoke with many attendees, played the gracious host. But Dante noticed how often she ended up near him, how their conversations kept resuming naturally, how comfortable she seemed in his presence. They ended up sitting together on a bench beside one of the bioluminescent pools, somewhat apart from the main gathering. "This is nice," Lysara said quietly, watching light ripple across the water. Being able to exist beside someone, without performing sovereignty every moment. Is that what it feels like, performing? Constantly. Every word chosen for political impact, every gesture analyzed for symbolic meaning, every biological response monitored by my court for what it reveals about policy positions. She looked at him. "With you, I find I care less about controlling my responses, which should terrify me but instead feels liberating." "Your skin has been bronze all evening," Dante observed. "I'm guessing that's not a state secret." "It indicates comfort, contentment, pleasure in present company." Her ears tilted forward curiosity. "Why do you ask questions you likely already know the answers to?" "Because knowing facts about Keltheran biology from briefing documents isn't the same as hearing you tell me how you feel. One is data, the other is connection." Her skin warmed to copper. "You are remarkably perceptive for someone from a species my people have historically dismissed as brief and unsophisticated. We're excellent at being underestimated. It's basically humanity's primary diplomatic advantage." That got a genuine laugh from her, not the careful sound from the council chamber, but real amusement. Several nearby Keltharans turned to look, clearly surprised to hear their queen laugh so openly. Lysara noticed the attention and her skin flickered cooler, but Dante spoke before she could retreat into sovereign mode. "Tell me about the gardens. They're stunning. Is there a story behind the design?" The question redirected her attention. She relaxed again, explaining how each section represented a different era of Keltharan history, how the plants were cultivated to reflect the aesthetics of their time period, how the whole garden was essentially a living chronicle of her people's evolution. As she talked, her passion for history became clear. This wasn't just royal gardens, it was her personal project, something she designed and maintained as a way to connect with her empire's past. Dante listened, asking questions that drew out more details, and watched her become more animated than he'd ever seen her. Eventually, she paused mid-explanation about genetic memory stored in certain flowering plants. "I'm talking too much. My advisors would be appalled at how much information I'm sharing with a foreign diplomat. I'm not here as a diplomat right now. I'm here as someone interested in hearing about things you care about. There's a difference." "Is there? Can you separate your role from yourself so easily?" "No, but I can prioritize. Right now, I'm more interested in Lysara showing me her gardens than in Ambassador Rivera gathering intelligence about Keltharan culture. The latter is useful, the former matters." Her expression softened into something almost vulnerable. "Do you mean that? Or is this diplomatic strategy, making me comfortable to gather more information?" Dante considered lying diplomatically, then chose truth. "I mean it. Yes, everything I learn here is technically useful for my posting, but that's not why I'm listening. I'm listening because you light up when you talk about things you care about, and watching someone be genuinely passionate about something is always worth attention, whether that someone is a queen or a gardener or a stranger in a market." Lysara was quiet for a moment, her eyes searching his face. "You see me as a person first, don't you? The throne is secondary." "Is that wrong?" "It's unusual, dangerous possibly, but not wrong." She stood, "Come with me. There's something I want to show you." She led him deeper into the gardens, away from the gathering, along paths that wound upward into the hillside behind the palace. The path was steep, definitely not designed for formal processions, and Lysara hiked it with clear familiarity despite her elaborate robes. "This doesn't seem very queenly," Dante observed, slightly out of breath. "It isn't, which is why I almost never come here anymore. Too undignified for a sovereign." She glanced back at him with something that might have been mischief. Try to keep up, Ambassador. You're representing your entire species, and currently you're representing us as poor climbers. Humans evolved on a planet with reasonable gravity and sensible terrain. This is basically a mountain. This is a modest slope. Don't be dramatic. They emerged at an overlook that stole Dante's breath, not from exertion this time, but from beauty. The entire capital city spread below them, 3 moons hanging in the night sky, and stars that looked impossibly close in the clear air. I used to come here often when I first took the throne, Lysara said quietly, settling onto the warm stone. Before duty consumed everything, before I learned that sovereigns don't have time for personal sanctuaries. Dante sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. What made you want to show me? Because you asked what I wanted earlier. Not what was appropriate or strategic, what I wanted. And this is what I wanted to share. This place that reminds me I'm Lysara, not just Queen Lysara. This view that makes me feel small and connected instead of isolated and elevated. It's beautiful. Thank you for trusting me with it. Thank you for seeing it as trust instead of as intelligence gathering. She was quiet for a moment, then continued. I find myself wanting to share things with you I've kept private for decades. Wanting to have conversations that aren't calculated for political impact. Wanting to just exist beside someone who sees me as person first and sovereign second. It's human, or the Keltharan equivalent. Dante shifted slightly closer, their shoulders now definitely touching. For what it's worth, I feel the same way. I'm supposed to maintain professional distance, document everything, treat every interaction as diplomatic opportunity. But with you, I mostly just want to understand who you are. What you think about when protocol isn't watching. What makes you laugh? What makes someone choose to rule billions for 50 years without apparent complaint? Who said it was without complaint? I simply complain internally and privately as befits a sovereign. Her tone was light, but there was real emotion underneath. You're dangerous, Dante Rivera. You make me want things I thought I'd successfully stopped wanting decades ago. Such as companionship, honest conversation, someone who cares about my well-being for its own sake rather than for what it means for political stability. She looked at him directly. Connection. I want connection with you, and that terrifies me because connection creates vulnerability. Connection also creates joy, support. The feeling that you're not alone in the universe, even when you're surrounded by people who see you as symbol instead of self. Dante reached for her hand carefully, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he interlaced their fingers gently. I care about you. Not about the throne or the alliance or diplomatic advantages. About you. About Lysara, who hikes to overlooks and cultivates living history gardens and apparently hasn't laughed in formal settings in 30 years but laughs at terrible jokes when she thinks no one's monitoring her responses. Her skin glowed copper gold in the moonlight, practically luminous. If I choose this, choose you, choose connection, there will be political consequences. My court already questions my judgment in sitting beside you publicly. If I continue, if I make clear I've developed personal feelings for a human ambassador, the pressure will intensify. What do you want to do? I want to keep choosing you, keep having conversations that matter, keep feeling like myself instead of like a throne given form. Her fingers tightened around his. But I need you to understand what you're accepting. This won't be simple or easy. We'll face opposition from my court, possibly from yours. Every interaction will be scrutinized for evidence that personal feelings are compromising policy decisions. And we'll have to navigate all of that while still fulfilling our respective roles. I understand, and I'm willing if you are. Lysara leaned closer, resting her head on his shoulder. A gesture of intimacy that would scandalize her court but here, in private, felt perfectly natural. Thank you for seeing me, for making me remember what connection feels like, for being patient with a queen who forgot how to be anything other than sovereign. They sat together on the overlook while the capital slept below them, Two people from different worlds choosing connection despite every complication. Dante didn't know how this would work long-term, didn't know how they'd navigate the political pressure and cultural expectations and inevitable challenges. But sitting there with Lysara warm against his side, her hand in his, watching stars that belonged to neither of their peoples, he knew one thing absolutely. This was worth fighting for, whatever this became. The political storm hit 3 days after the gathering. Dante was reviewing trade proposals when Morgan burst into his quarters looking like she'd aged a decade overnight. Emergency council session. The Queen's advisors are demanding she address concerns about inappropriate personal attachments compromising sovereign judgment. Morgan's expression was grim. They're coming for your relationship, Dante. And they're not being subtle about it. The emergency session was held in the formal council chamber, but unlike regular sessions, it was closed. Only the Queen's 7 closest advisors plus Dante, whose presence had been specifically requested. Demanded actually, though the formal language tried to make it sound voluntary. Queen Lysara sat at the table's head, her skin a neutral silver that revealed nothing. Her expression was perfectly composed, the sovereign mask firmly in place. Dante took his assigned seat and tried to look more confident than he felt. Advisor Thane spoke first, his tone carefully respectful but his words sharp. Your Majesty, this council shares a concern that must be addressed. Over the past week, you have deviated significantly from established protocol. You have sat beside a foreign ambassador publicly. You have invited him to private councils. You have included him in informal gatherings typically reserved for intimate household members. And you have been observed speaking with him in ways that suggest personal attachment rather than diplomatic necessity. I am aware of my own actions, Advisor Thane, Lysara replied, her voice perfectly controlled. Continue with your concern. Our concern is that personal feelings may be influencing your judgment, that you may be compromising our strategic position to satisfy emotional needs that sovereigns are expected to manage privately, that you may be, he paused delicately, allowing a human to have undue influence over Keltheran governance. The accusation hung in the air like a blade. Dante felt everyone's eyes on him, some openly hostile, others merely calculating. He started to speak, but Lysara held up one hand. Ambassador Rivera did not request this session. I will address your concerns. She stood, moving to the window, her posture absolutely rigid with controlled authority. For 50 years, I have been exactly the sovereign you required. I have maintained emotional control and physical distance. I have governed without personal bias or attachment. I have been the throne you demanded, perfect, untouchable, absolutely isolated. And I have done it without complaint, because I understood it was necessary. She turned to face the council. But in 50 years, not one of you has asked what that cost, what it means to exist as institution rather than individual, what it requires to maintain absolute control for decades without respite, or acknowledgement that sovereigns are also beings with needs and limitations. Your Majesty, another advisor began, but Lysara cut them off. Ambassador Rivera has reminded me that sovereignty need not require complete destruction of personhood, that I can govern effectively while also acknowledging I am Lysara as well as Queen. That connection does not inherently compromise judgment. It can enhance it by providing perspectives I would not access through isolation alone. But Your Majesty, Advisor Thane pressed, the appearance of personal attachment creates political vulnerability. Your enemies will use this against you. They will question your judgment, suggest you're compromised, possibly challenge your authority based on claims of emotional instability. Let them try. Lysara's voice was soft but carried absolute authority. I have governed this empire for 5 decades without significant challenge to my authority. I have made decisions that strengthened our position, expanded our influence, and maintained stability through multiple crises. My judgment is proven. If anyone wishes to challenge me based on claims I'm compromised by personal connection, they are welcome to present evidence that my governance has actually suffered. Can any of you demonstrate that my recent decisions have been less effective? Silence fell over the council. Several advisors exchanged glances, but none spoke. No. Then perhaps your concern is not about governance effectiveness, but about adherence to traditions that serve your comfort rather than our empire's needs. Her skin was warming now, shifting from silver toward amber, emotion breaking through control, but controlled even in that breaking. I am not abandoning my duties. I am not allowing personal feelings to override strategic necessity. I am simply acknowledging that I am both sovereign and person, and that perhaps 5 decades of sacrificing the latter for the former was unsustainable. Dante found his voice, carefully respectful but firm. If I may address the council's concerns directly, he waited for Lysara's nod before continuing. I understand my presence is unusual, that my friendship with your queen deviates from established norms, but consider what you're asking her to sacrifice. 50 years of absolute isolation, 50 years without genuine conversation or personal connection, 50 years of being observed constantly but seen by no one. Is that truly what sovereignty requires? Or is it what you require to maintain power structures that depend on your queen being inaccessible? The statement was bold, possibly too bold. Several advisors bristled visibly, but Dante continued. I don't influence Her Majesty's policy decisions. We discuss ideas, challenge each other's assumptions, explore perspectives neither would reach alone. That's collaboration, not manipulation. And the fact that we also genuinely care about each other doesn't compromise that, it strengthens it, because we trust each other enough to be honest even when honesty is uncomfortable. You speak presumptuously for someone so recently arrived, another advisor said coldly. He speaks honestly, Lysara countered, which is precisely why I value his perspective. I am tired of presumption disguised as deference, of political maneuvering disguised as concern for my well-being. Advisor Thane, if you have legitimate governance concerns, present them. But do not disguise attempts to control my personal choices as concern for our empire. The challenge was clear. Thane's skin flickered through multiple colors: anger, frustration, calculation. Your Majesty, we simply wish to protect you, to ensure that your historic legacy is not compromised by decisions made for emotional rather than strategic reasons. My legacy will be defined by how I governed, not by whether I maintained absolute isolation while doing so. Lysara returned to the table, sitting with deliberate composure. I appreciate your concern, but I am your queen, not your construction. I will continue to govern with the same effectiveness I have demonstrated for 50 years, and I will also continue to acknowledge my own personhood and make personal choices that serve my well-being alongside my duties. She looked at each advisor in turn. If any of you have specific concerns about governance decisions I have made recently, present them now. Otherwise, this session is concluded. No one spoke. The advisors exchanged glances, clearly unsettled, but unable to present concrete evidence that Lysara's governance had actually suffered. Eventually, they filed out, some looking frustrated, others thoughtful, all clearly aware that something fundamental had shifted. When the chamber was empty except for Lysara and Dante, the silence felt heavy. That was brave, Dante said quietly, and probably politically dangerous. It was necessary. Lysara's shoulders slumped slightly, exhaustion breaking through. They've relied on my isolation to maintain certain power dynamics, my willingness to be accessible only through them, to filter all information through their advice. By forming a direct connection with you, I've disrupted those dynamics. They see it as threat. Is it a threat? To some of them, yes. To others, simply uncomfortable change. And to a few, she paused, possibly a reminder that I'm more than the throne they serve. That I have agency and needs, and the right to make choices about my own existence. Dante moved closer. What happens now? Now we navigate this carefully. They'll watch for any sign that my feelings for you are actually compromising my judgment. Any policy decision that seems influenced by human perspectives will be scrutinized. Any time I spend with you will be monitored for propriety and appropriateness. Her skin had cooled to gray, but when she looked at him, it warmed slightly. It won't be easy. Worth it, though. Yes, she reached for his hand. Absolutely worth it. Because you've given me something I didn't know I'd lost. The ability to be myself without apology. To care about someone without strategizing about political implications. To feel like Lysara instead of just Queen Lysara. Even if it causes complications. Especially because it causes complications. Because the alternative is returning to isolation that looks like strength but feels like slow death. She squeezed his hand. Will you stay? Even knowing it will be difficult. I'm not going anywhere. We'll figure this out together. Over the following months, they did figure it out. Carefully, deliberately, navigating the political pressure while maintaining both their connection and their respective roles. Dante attended councils where his perspectives proved valuable, but he was careful to support Lysara's decisions rather than appearing to influence them. Lysara continued choosing moments of personal connection, sitting beside him occasionally during informal gatherings, seeking his company for private conversations, allowing their friendship to be visible without being scandalous. The court adjusted. Slowly, grudgingly, but they adjusted. Partly because opposing a queen who'd proven her competence for 50 years was politically risky. Partly because some advisors genuinely supported their sovereign's well-being. And partly because people noticed something important. Lysara governed with new energy. Her council sessions were more dynamic. Her decisions showed creativity that had been absent before. Connection hadn't weakened her, it had revitalized her. 6 months after that first formal gathering, Dante stood in his designated position during a ceremonial presentation of new trade agreements, formal, proper, maintaining appropriate distance. Queen Lysara sat on her throne, her skin the cool silver of official proceedings, delivering pronouncements with perfect sovereign authority. Then, at the ceremony's conclusion, she did something that had become familiar enough not to shock, but still delighted everyone who supported the changes. She descended from her throne and crossed the hall to sit beside Ambassador Rivera on the common bench. "Well, Ambassador," she said, her skin warming to copper gold, "I believe you had thoughts about the Merchants' Consortium proposal." "Several thoughts, Your Majesty," Dante replied, his own smile undisguised. "Though I hesitate to presume." "You presume nothing. You offer perspectives I value, speak freely." So they talked, sovereign and ambassador, Lysara and Dante, and the court watched this new normal. A queen who chose connection alongside duty, an ambassador who saw person before throne. A relationship that had challenged ancient customs and proven that sometimes the most radical act a ruler can take is allowing themselves to be human. Or in Lysara's case, allowing herself to be Keltheran, with all the emotional complexity her culture had tried to breed out of royalty. Later, in the privacy of their now regular evening walks through the gardens, Lysara leaned against Dante, her fingers interlaced with his. "My historians are going to have questions about this era," she said. "About the human ambassador who disrupted 5 decades of tradition by treating their queen like a person. What will you tell them? That sometimes the most important diplomatic breakthrough isn't a treaty or trade agreement. It's two people from different worlds choosing to see each other clearly and care anyway." She looked up at him. "That sovereignty is stronger when it includes humanity or Keltheranity, I suppose. That isolation may look like strength, but connection is actual power." Very philosophical for someone who used to maintain perfect emotional control. "I'm blaming you for that. You've made me soft and sentimental." "You're welcome." She laughed, that genuine sound he'd learned to treasure, and pulled him toward the memory pools. "Come, I want to show you something about genetic memory storage. Purely educational, you understand. Purely educational, Dante agreed, matching her formal tone despite his smile. I'm always eager to learn about Keltheran history. Good, because you're part of it now. The ambassador who sat beside a queen and reminded her that thrones are meant to serve the people sitting on them, not consume them entirely. They walked together through gardens that had seen centuries of rulers, but tonight held something unprecedented. A sovereign who'd chosen presence over protocol, and the person who'd made that choice feel like strength rather than weakness. And across the capital, in formal chambers and informal gatherings, Keltherans watched their queen laugh and talk and simply exist beside someone she cared about, and slowly, very slowly, began reconsidering what sovereignty actually required. Perhaps, they thought, perfection